These MMA guys, just because they throw punches doesn't mean they box. This is why I'm so confident in my ability to destroy these guys. They're throwing elbows, kicks, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, the list goes on. Boxing is an art. MMA is a brawl. And with that, welcome to Early Stoppage, a show where the news of the day is usually given just enough time, but sometimes not enough. If this is your first time stopping by, we thank you. And get ready for something you won't find anywhere else. I'm John Franklin, and I'm joined by the Godfather of Fight Night Picks, Craig Allen. Craig, how are you?
John, I'm doing well. On this Thursday evening, I'm rocking a Peach Edition Red Bull. I like the Peach Edition Red Bull, peach/nectarine. It's better than that monster that I had last week that was just god-awful. But overall, really excited. I mean, we don't have a fight card this weekend, so me and the missus are going to spend the weekend doing whatever else, not really watching MMA. KSW 58 Saturday morning, I'll watch that. But other than that, I'm looking forward to a productive weekend, getting ready for the Volkov Overeem card the next weekend. But yeah, it's good times. Good times.
It is good times. On this episode of Early Stoppage, we talk McGregor's future, Askren's hands, and PFL's return. We begin with Dustin Poirier. Craig, Dustin Poirier is the man of the hour, the man with the power, too sweet to be sour. The world is his oyster, and whatever it is that's going to be done at 155 has to go through Dustin Poirier. But there is one little problem. All the big fights for Poirier that might involve the lightweight belt are with guys he's already beaten. The rumors of Poirier's next fights are McGregor, Diaz, Gaethje, two of whom he has already fought, and all three who aren't deserving of a title shot based on their recent outings. So, Craig, what's Poirier's play here?
Well, if you're Dustin Poirier, you probably want to cash in, don't you? Like, you've had some pretty tough fights. You had the Holloway fight, the fight against Khabib. You've already taken on Gaethje. Then you had McGregor. To me, Poirier is kind of in that Nate Diaz equivalency in terms of star power right now. Like, you talk about hot in the streets. Like, Dustin Poirier's got that hot sauce to boot. So for me, Dustin Poirier commands a lot of respect. When I look at this division, we did a whole episode on this with Fight Night Picks Pairing Counter at the start of the week. We kind of talked about what's the next play, who seeds where in this division. For me, I think Poirier and Charlie Olives makes a lot of sense, and that seems to be what the fans are thinking. They voted in the community tab. That was what majority of fans went with. Gaethje obviously being a close second, but again, Gaethje's coming off a title fight loss to Khabib, so it's not uncommon now for fighters to lose a fight and then get a title shot. I still don't like it. Another fight with McGregor, I get it, but I don't really want to see it. He knocked him out in the second round. Khabib's probably not going to happen. So for me, the play is you fight Charlie Olives, but for everybody else, again, like you said, Diaz is even in this conversation. So it's a little weird.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's weird. I think the weirdest thing, and we'll talk about this later, some of the ultimatums that Justin Gaethje's making, but I think that you got to cash out if you're Khabib. I mean, I'm sorry, if you're Poirier, because you're not going to see Khabib. So I know that people have a lot of pushback on a McGregor fight because Conor just got knocked out, but at the same time, he has at least a win over Dustin Poirier. Was it 100 years ago? Sure. But all these other guys that are making their plays, Nate lost the last fight against Conor, and he lost his last fight a weight class up. Gaethje lost to Poirier, and doesn't have that win that Conor has. So I'm with you. I think that for the sport, it's Charlie Olives, right? That's the play for the sport. Like, if you want to keep the integrity of the sport, the integrity of the division, all that, it's Oliveira. But if you're Poirier and you want to give this kid what he probably deserves, then I think the fight's Conor. And we'll talk about this later, if that means Justin Gaethje gets someone else signing his checks, that's just what that means. I'm with you. I think that you gotta. And we've been talking about this forever with the money fights. There's the fight that makes sense for the division, and the fight that makes sense for the A side. And right now, Dustin Poirier is the A side. He holds all the cards.
So, I mean, let's talk about it. With last weekend's main event loss, Conor McGregor took to Instagram, and well, it looked like he was operating probably a 0.8 ton mini excavator or thereabouts. Had a nice little small ditching bucket, looked like between a 9-inch, 12-inch. Yeah, in my other life, I'm a product specialist on this kind of stuff. I noticed these things. It was a cheap model, but either way, compact equipment man myself. Here's the question, though. You get McGregor on Instagram operating heavy equipment. Obviously, that's not the play for him. But if you are Conor McGregor, what's your next move here career-wise?
It's either advocating for the Dustin fight or fighting Nate Diaz. I mean, that's really it. Those are the two choices. And I think that if you're Nate Diaz, you should be calling Conor McGregor's name as well, because you have a better chance of getting to that 55 belt. Listen, if you could convince Dustin Poirier that you're the fight, that's your path. I don't care if you're Charlie Olives, Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz, anybody at 55. Kevin Lee, doesn't matter who. If you can convince Dustin Poirier that you should be his next fight, and Chael brought up an interesting thing on one of his videos, which is that all these fights make sense for Dustin Poirier. We just have a problem with when you add the belt, right? Like, do you have a problem with Nate Diaz fighting Dustin Poirier? No. Do you have a problem with it being for the lightweight belt? Well, yeah, probably. So I think that, if I'm Conor, I obviously go for the 55-pound belt because that's the play. But then again, we didn't touch on this with Poirier. It just makes for a weird situation where now they're fighting again, this time for the belt after Conor lost. So if I'm the UFC, I probably match up Conor and Nate, because you're starting to run out of real estate to make that happen. Although there are people that think, and I've said this before, so I'm one of them, that Conor and Nate will be relevant in perpetuity. They can fight when they're in their 40s and people will still care. But yeah, I think for Conor next, it's Nate. Let Poirier fight Charlie Olives and then move on.
The two names that we kind of came up in that seeding episode of Parry Encounter, the first one, RDA. I mean, if you look at the rankings, they're neck and neck right there. Obviously, you have the built-in fact they were supposed to fight in 2016. You have the old face-off pictures you can play off, kind of like when they matched up Poirier with McGregor here at 55 this last weekend. So for me, it's Dos Anjos. But again, that's from a competition perspective. I want to see Poirier fight Oliveira from a competition perspective for the belt. Will it happen? I don't know. The UFC can kind of go off on different tangents where, are they a sport? Are they entertainment? We focus on it a lot. Patrick Auger has a podcast on it with Body Lock, so we'll let him talk about it. But for me, you're right. Maybe Diaz at 170 pounds or Dos Anjos at 55. I think those are the two plays for McGregor. Or you just sell as much whiskey as you can.
All right, let's move on, Craig. I'm sure if you are a serious MMA fan and you are a fan of this podcast, you're probably asking yourself, what are these two idiots doing not talking about Michael Chandler in either the first or second segment? It's because we're talking about Chandler in the third segment, Craig. Michael Chandler had a hell of a debut. Big knockout over a fighter at the top of the division, then cut a great promo. So we've talked for a long time on this podcast about who's the next Jorge Masvidal. So I guess my question is, one, does Chandler have a Jorge Masvidal path to stardom? I'll add for context that he recently, I believe on Instagram, talking to Ric Flair after he cut a Ric Flair-like promo. Woo! So the question is, does Chandler have a Jorge Masvidal-like path to stardom? And is that what it'll take for him to get the shot at 55?
Remember when Masvidal had that fight and he had Roberto Duran with him, and they didn't really make a big deal about it? They made more of a big deal that The Rock was there than Roberto Duran. I thought that Duran was kind of in his corner, or with his team, with his camp. I thought that was pretty cool for Masvidal. But to have Ric Flair, I mean, Ric Flair transcends sports. He's in a Migos song, the entire music video. It's really weird. I didn't like it. I was never a Ric Flair guy, John, because when I got into professional wrestling was probably around 2007, 2008, to where Ric Flair was fighting Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania, and he was 65, 70 years old, walking around in his underwear. I never really liked Ric Flair as a wrestler, and I never really got the whole thing, but he's still a huge deal. So for me, having a Ric Flair kind of mention in your Instagram, having that Zoom call, having Ric Flair tweet out a promo video of Ric Flair and Michael Chandler on Twitter, that got some traction too. You can't go wrong there. Does he have a Masvidal path to stardom? I think even if Chandler loses a fight or two, he's still relevant. He's not going to end up like somebody fighting in a big boxing match. I think he's got some time still, even at 34 years old. So yeah, I think he does have a bit of a Masvidal path to stardom, as long as he doesn't kind of get a little bit derivative and go off into the weird corners of the political spectrum on the socials.
I think not going into the weird corners of the political spectrum is one thing. Also, I think don't go into the weird corners of professional wrestling. Stick with the fact that you got co-signed by Ric Flair, but don't start showing up on Raw. Don't play that card. Here's what I do think you do, though. And I tweeted this earlier in the week, And I think this would be a huge, huge missed opportunity by Michael Chandler. Next fight, I don't care who it is. When you come out to Ric Flair's theme, but not the whole theme. And here's why. Because if you come out to the whole theme, you can't help but look like a pompous asshole unless you're Ric Flair. You come out with the opening, and then it turns into a fast enough song for you to run to the ring. So it's like you get that bum, 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 and then you just hit it and go to the ring. That way you're acknowledging Flair, but you're not like, I'm making us sit through this long ass thing where you're like, doing this whole arms out kind of bullshit.
If you wanted to do that, now I still get, I like the 80s wrestling, 80s and 90s wrestling, like the Mr. Perfect intro. That would be too long. Don't do that.
Don't do that. I just think that, he has the path. I think that he's a little bit, not as much of a boogeyman as Charlie Olives is right now, but he's getting there. I mean, nobody wants, when you have a short debut and you have a huge knockout like that, when you're a guy who's known to go the distance in Bellator and be able to take punishment, people are like, man, I'm picking my poison here. I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. If I want to go along with this guy, he can take it and he can wrestle and it's a long night. If I want to go after him, he might clip me and just end the thing. So now he's really becoming this guy that's a problem for a lot of people. One person who's not scared of any of that is Dustin Poirier. So I don't think that the short answer to a long-winded response is that I do think that Chandler and Poirier would be a good fight. I do think you can make a case that Chandler deserves it, but I don't think that Chandler's star is big enough to leapfrog the people in front of him for where Dustin Poirier is at in his career.
We'll have to see what happens, moving forward. But, they always bring this sentence up and it can be put in a lot of different ways. I'm going to, misquote it, but, go home with the girl that you brought to the dance. See, I'm terrible. I can never remember exactly how it goes. But all that to say that Fight Night Picks fans were less than lukewarm as far as their reception to our channel's coverage of the Mike Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr. boxing event back in November. A little bit of a reminder, Fight Night Picks fans, because it just popped up my Facebook timeline. I did one of these for Jake Paul's first fight against Anise and Gibb. This time last year, everybody forgets about it. I did a whole training montage out in the snow, and you didn't see it, but you got upset when I did the Tyson Jones Jr. thing. I'm still a little salty. All that to say that in April, we have an upcoming Triller card that's set to host Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. Now, John, Tyson and Jones Jr. broke all of the digital pay-per-view records, if you believe Triller. So on a scale of Lewis to Ngannou 2 to Khabib versus Tony, when it was supposed to happen again and again and again, but very highly anticipated in 2018. Where does this fight land for you?
If you're pulling quotes from this podcast, if you believe Triller would be a good one to pull. Yeah, that's a huge, huge if you believe Triller. Listen, I don't get too wrapped up in this stuff. I thought that Ben Askren kind of flamed out as a mixed martial artist in the UFC. I'm not overly excited to see his hands. I did like some of the movement that I saw in the videos that he released, but, they're videos that he released. So the thing that, you see Conor McGregor running upstairs or Ben Askren, doing some of the stuff he was doing. And it's like, all right, did he do that for 20 minutes or did he do that for 40 seconds for Instagram? Who knows? I'm not convinced his hands are great, but I'm also not convinced that they would have to be to beat Jake Paul. I think Jake Paul is taking this very seriously. And I think that there is a, there's a saying that, you can only tell 10 stories, right? The boy falls in love, boy and girl fall out of love, all that stuff, right? You can only write 10 stories. There's only so many gimmicks that you can do in fighting. And one of them is I talk a lot of shit, which makes you think I'm not that great. But in reality, I'm honing my craft. Conor McGregor mastered this, right? Everybody took him lightly, to include Dustin Poirier, because of how he talked. Jake Paul's kind of doing this now. So yeah, he's doing stupid videos where he's like doing a running punch with Jorge Masvidal. That's not the work he's putting in. Say what you want to say about Nate Robinson. He knocked that kid dead. And it's not that easy to knock somebody dead, even if you want to. So, but now listen, we see a bunch of videos on Twitter about, kids in high school knocking. So, I mean, it can happen. I'm excited about this fight only because it's a step up in the caliber of athlete. combat sports wise for Jake Paul, but I do think he's doing a little sleight of hand here. It's kind of a lateral move. He still isn't really getting in there with known boxers. He's continuing to say, well, this guy's a good athlete. He should be able to fight. This guy fought MMA. He should be able to fight, but he knows what he's doing.
Like with Triller, it's kind of like with BKFC. And listen, I get it. Jake Paul is a huge deal. He's a huge deal on YouTube, millions of subscribers, all that great stuff. Musical artist. But if you look at that card, the first Triller card, you had all those names that came out and rapped. You had Snoop Dogg, you had Adesanya in the main event. Well, that's really what sold the show, was it not? Between Tyson and Jones Jr. That's what I was there for. That's why I bought the t-shirt from Roots of Fight. That's what I got excited about. So you look at this next event. Well, can you put a bigger fight ahead of Paul and Askren? I don't know if they can. So I look at that almost like BKFC. They kept having bigger and bigger events. Artem Lobov fought Jason Knight. That was a big deal to MMA fans, and there was a lot of crossover. Then Paulie Malignaggi had a fight with him, and it was huge. And then after that, well, what happened? I know they're going to have Knuckle Mania coming up next. What is it? This weekend? Next weekend? Whenever it is, Paige Van Zant's got to fight. But, you know, when you go so big and over the top for your first event, it's going to be really tough to try and replicate it. So we'll have to see what happens. If I were to put money on it and I'd have to see a line, I'd probably go with Jake Paul over Ben Askren. But it's interesting. And you can never trust those Instagram videos. Remember Thiago Santos doing capoeira and then posting the same video like 2 months later, but at a slightly different angle. Everybody thought he was going to be great against Glover Teixeira, only still had bum knees and no jiu-jitsu. So yeah, those videos can be incredibly deceiving.
Yeah, and I think we do got to give Jake Paul a little bit of credit here because, you know, sometimes these things just happen. Like I think the Jorge Masvidal thing was a lot of things coming together for his benefit, right? Like the Leon Edwards thing, the Till fight, the Askren fight, right? These things coming together led to his stardom, growing his hair out. You know, I saw some highlights of Cerrone and Masvidal they were putting out on social media. He was doing the same stuff. He was carrying himself the same way. It just didn't look the same. You know, he had the weird beard. His hair was short. So sometimes just a change in look makes all the difference. Listen, Joe Rogan, when he was balding versus Joe Rogan when he shaved his head, things changed, right? It's just different. So I think that we need to give Paul credit here because he's a YouTuber and he's probably doing a little bit more to orchestrate this. Listen, it's genius putting yourself on the co-main event of Tyson Jones, right? But then you got to deliver, right? So now that he delivers, it makes it, people are more inclined to let you headline a card. Now, it's probably not going to do what Jones Tyson did, but at least people are open to it, right? Instead of like we heard recently, they tried to put together Logan Paul, Floyd Mayweather, nobody was biting. At least this Askren, Jake Paul thing has some legs. All right, Craig, let's move on. Let's talk about PFL. I'm going to keep it short. It's finally happening. The PFL's returning. The schedule is April 23rd, April 29th, May 6th, June 10th, June 17th, the 25th of June. That's the schedule, pretty much. How excited should we get for this?
Okay, so the 23rd of April is on a Friday. The 29th is on a Thursday. Then we get into May. I got to move my calendar around. The 6th is on a Thursday. The 10th is on a Monday. The 17th is on a Monday. The 25th is on a Tuesday. Hey, PFL, pick a night of the week. What are you doing? Like Bellator always used to do, what, Friday? Occasionally they do a Saturday if there wasn't UFC, but normally it was a Friday. And then now they move to Wednesday. When they have cards again, they're going to be on Wednesday. They have a card coming up in February. PFL was always what? Wednesday or Thursday? I can't remember now.
Thursday, I think.
It was Thursday.
Because is it Contender Series Wednesday? I know they didn't go up against Contender Series. So
Tuesday night Contender Series.
Oh, yeah. So then maybe they
See, I should know this. I can't remember. It's been a full season since PFL, and I do other things with my life. But yeah, when you go Friday, Thursday, Monday, Tuesday, like it's going to be way too difficult to hook people in. And I know that might sound silly. And yes, they still have a big platform of ESPN. But again, PFL is one of those things that you have to try and grab a real casual audience. I know you're going to have the hardcores somewhat involved, but it's odd. Now, maybe that was the only time that they could get venues. I know they're big on that Hulu Theater at MSG. They've had shows in Chicago before. They've had shows in Vegas and New Jersey. But yeah, it's a weird one for me, and it's going to be really hard for them to gain traction where they're just kind of throwing darts at a board in terms of calendar dates.
So 2019, it was Thursdays. Thursday, May 9th, Thursday, May 23rd. They did one Friday card, October 11th, and one Tuesday card, December 31st, for obvious reasons. December 31st. So I'm with you. They had Thursday night lockdown. I think that there's two ways to look at this, and I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt here. I do think that they are strong enough from a social media perspective, not necessarily in following, but I'm talking about in production, that they could, get some attention in a short period of time with the help of ESPN. So if you have a card on Monday, here's the problem. If your cards are on Mondays, or you got to figure out how to build it up. So are they using like baseball to build up? Like what's the play? Like what are they going on the back of? If there's nothing to go on the back of, it's great that you're ESPN, but listen, ESPN's laying people off because they're not getting enough viewers. So to just say that just because they have ESPN, it's in the bag, they may be. I just think I'm with you. If you're trying to build an audience, you have to do it on a certain night consistently. There's a reason why they did all Thursday cards before. So I'm with you. I agree. I think that they need to. They really need to get a little bit. I mean, like I said, I trust their ability to market themselves, but it's just moving all over the dial like that, I think is a recipe for disaster.
It'd be like, your in-laws, they're big Bang Theory fans, or they're big Young Sheldon fans. And then all of a sudden, Young Sheldon isn't, I don't know what night Young Sheldon's on, but it's not on Thursdays. Now it's Tuesday, but the next week it's Wednesday. Nobody's going to tune into Young Sheldon anymore. As you can tell, I don't tune into Young Sheldon, but I'll watch the PFL. We'll move on from there. John, we had some on news drop in the last 24 hours, and it popped up on my Reddit feed today. Probably one of the least surprising statements that anybody's heard today, the fact that something popped up on the Reddit feed with Raquel Pennington self-reporting a possible doping violation due to a medication she was prescribed by a doctor due to a medical condition. For those of you following along at home, it's 7-keto DHEA and AOD-9064. John, USADA hit her with a 6-month suspension, and she's eligible to compete after May 17th. With this circumstance, where you've got a fighter self-reporting like this, and it was prescribed by a doctor, taken, relatively unknowingly, does this punishment really fit the crime here? It's kind of a weird circumstance overall.
It's a very weird circumstance overall, and I don't think the punishment fits the crime, because I think that this is something that you're going to want. If you're USADA and you feel like this girl did it the right way, then how do you reinforce that to other fighters? It's not putting her on the shelf for 6 months. That's not the answer. So I think that for me, if you're Raquel Pennington, here's a better question. If you're Raquel Pennington, would you self-report next time? Because, would the punishment be, do you think, would the punishment be greater had she been caught? Yeah, I think so, right? Is it 2 years? If she'd been caught with this, it's 2 years. So if you're her, you definitely got the better end of it by self-reporting. But I think that a slap on the wrist isn't the way to go, but maybe they're trying to say, hey, listen, it's your job to know what's going in your body, irregardless of if it's prescribed to you or not. It's your job to know, and this is the equivalency of a slap on the wrist, but enough for you to say, hey, when you go to your doctor next time, say, hey, I am a fighter. I get tested by USADA. Will any of what you're prescribing me affect that? It's not a hard question to ask.
Yeah, that's the thing. And the weird thing about the circumstance, too, is the fact that I don't believe that she had tested with USADA yet, self-reported very quickly. And, there's all those armchair quarterback types over on Reddit saying, oh, well, this is why she took it. These are, the possible effects of this medication. And maybe this is the medical condition that she has. People are going to do that. But you look at it, and if it's somebody that obviously didn't mean to take it for performance enhancing reasons, it was prescribed by a doctor. Yes. On one side of the coin, it's, it is your fault. You shouldn't have taken it. But at the same time, she had at least the proactive mindset of once she found out to self-report. And it's one of those ones, would they do it behind closed doors? You never know. But yeah, 6 months is pretty tricky. She's what, 34, I think, right now? Like a 2-year sentence really would have hampered her career.
Yeah, I agree. I think she did the right thing, but I think USADA could have been a little bit lighter on her. But it's weird, man. You get older and you'll find this out someday. You get older, you start to see things from a lot of different perspectives, and you say to yourself, I could see why they would do that. And which is why I respect people like Stephen A. and Max Kellerman, who are both older than me, that just completely, I don't want to say sell their souls, but like go on those shows and just take such a hard line. Like, you guys are in your 50s, man. You can't see things from, I mean, they can obviously, but they're choosing not to. But that's where I think it gets interesting. I can see this from USADA's perspective as a way to, kind of motivate fighters to talk more in depth with their doctors. But yeah, if it's a tough, pardon the pun, it's a tough pill to swallow if you're Raquel Pennington. All right, Craig, let's move on to sparring sessions. Craig, Conor McGregor's knowledge or admittance of knowledge of calf kicks has come under some scrutiny in the post-fight. He said he was checking them. What's the big deal? Now, in fairness to McGregor, he may think trying to catch Dustin Poirier's foot is checking a calf kick. Whatever. Here's my question about the whole Conor McGregor Dustin Poirier fight. Do you feel like Conor McGregor came in unprepared? Is Poirier a new fighter? Was it a technique thing where just Poirier found a hole in McGregor's game, exploited it, and took him out? Like, how much blame should we give Conor McGregor versus how much credit should we give Dustin Poirier?
Poirier's always been, a decent leg kicker. And it's one of those ones where when he hurt his hip and he took that layoff between the Khabib fight and the fight with Dan Hooker, I was worried about it because you never know how somebody's going to come back. Of course, Jose Aldo threw a lot of leg kicks at the start of his career, all the way up through, and then all of a sudden stopped until recently. I mean, he's kind of gotten back to them. In the Vera fight, he started throwing them again. So for me, Poirier, he's added more wrinkles to his game, in the last 6 years. I think it might be a little bit more, maybe it's ring rust. Conor saying that he was unprepared. It's a bit of a technique thing too, because if you look at that main thing that Conor does, the little bit of a lean back, throws the left hand, maybe you can get him on his lead leg and really kind of chew away at it. So there's a lot of different things that I think Poirier did really well in that fight. Obviously won it by TKO, but yeah. I put the onus on Conor McGregor there. I mean, his hands look slick, right? But his footwork didn't look all that great. I don't think he was checking them. And that was probably the biggest, conversation around the water cooler at my place of business for the casual of casual MMA fans was, well, geez, he looked flat-footed. He didn't look very good. If a lot of people that don't know MMA are saying that, you got to, again, take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. But yeah, listen, I'll chalk it up to Kavanaugh and McGregor, and maybe they have to go back to the drawing board here.
Well, here's the issue if you're Conor McGregor, and I agree where the criticism of being flat-footed comes from. I've saw some things on Reddit and other places that the flat-footedness is a result of training for boxing. And in the past, Conor McGregor's defense, he has a horrible stance in terms of for MMA when people are attacking his legs. Now, his defense in the past has been, it's hard to kick my legs when I'm kicking your face with my legs. So he's always had active legs, which makes it harder to kick them. He didn't in this fight. I will say this, though. One thing that I noticed about the fight, I'm sure other people noticed, is there was one part in the fight, I can't remember what round it was in, but he countered Poirier with like a right hook, and he had him wobbled. Now, if he swarms Poirier there, he might get a finish, he might not, but he kind of just had him wobbled and stood there and kind of waited for everything to reset. So it's not like he didn't have his moments with Poirier. But when you get finished, you get finished. I mean, that's that. Juan Manuel Marquez flattened Manny Pacquiao and turned him into a meme. Nobody knows what Manny Pacquiao did in the third round because it doesn't matter because Marquez flattened him. So I think that that's kind of what we're dealing with here. I do think the one thing I'll add to this discussion is that I do think Conor needs to really think about whether or not he wants to be a boxer or an MMA fighter. And we'll get to this later when we talk about Jake Paul. But you train differently. And if you're going to go in there and train 12 rounds throwing 0 kicks, you can't think that's going to not affect you in the cage. And I think that he really needs to decide which way he wants to lean because the training is different. And he seems to be, if he's abandoning the kicks in training, he's going to abandon them in the fight.
100%, John. Let's move into a new segment with fight night picks and early stoppage. And this is one that I'm really looking forward to. And we've talked about a lot of the fighters that we will talk about in previous segments and previous episodes, because we always like to see that new blood coming into the UFC. This one's called the Hype Index. And John, I have a number of prospects, maybe some of them are more than prospects, that are in the UFC right now that have had a lot of success in a very short period of time. And we're going to rank them in terms of where they fall on our Hype Index. So John, the fighters that we have, of course, Khamzat Chimaev, 9-0, 3-0 so far in the UFC. That was all in 2020. Merab dvalishvili started his UFC career 0-2 right off the bat. He's 5-0 since then, 12-4 total record. Manon fiorot, that came out midweek last week on the Chiesa and Magny card, 6-1, 1-0 in the UFC. The last 4 fights have all been wins by stoppage. Her 2020 was insane with UAE Warriors. Tatiana Suarez, a name that we haven't heard of for a while, 8-0 total, 5-0 in the UFC. Ciryl Gane, my guy out of France, 7-0, 4-0 in the UFC with the knockout win over Junior Dos Santos his last time out. And my other guy, Jiri Prochazka, the guy's 27-3-1, 1-0 in the UFC. And I went back last night and watched his fight against Volkan Oezdemir. If you want to have fun in the light heavyweight division, this guy is fun for sure. He's got a main event coming up against Dominic Reyes in the near future. So those are the prospects in the Hype Index, John. Where are you going to rank them?
All right, I'm going to do this in a rather unorthodox way because that's just the kind of guy I am. I'm going to, if I look at these fighters on a timeline, and the end of the timeline is the championship belt, I'm going to rate them in terms of who I think is furthest from it and who I think is closest to it. So that would mean that your girl Manon fiorot is the first, is the bottom of the list, right? And I butchered her last name. Yeah, give me it one more time.
Manon fiorot.
Fiorot. Yeah, I said something that's not that. So I have her at the bottom of the list. We're going to go backwards. I have her at the bottom of the list. Next up, I'm going to go with Merab dvalishvili because I think that he's got big RDA vibes in the sense that, you know, he came out, didn't quite have it figured out, but now he's with a great team. Now he's starting to figure it out. He knows what he is. And I think that's a lot for people in general and fighters. The secret is, and I think Anthony Pena struggles with this, the secret is, do you know who you are and can you fight that way? How you're built, how you're, all that stuff. Do you know who you are? And I think Merab is figuring out who he is. Next up, I'm going to go with Jiri Prochazka because I think that I like a lot of what he's doing, and I could see an outside chance with people leaving the division for him to get to the belt, but it's just not there quite yet for me. After that's Tatiana Suarez because Tatiana Suarez was a real problem, and I hate that. That's an overused saying, but I'm gonna use it here. In her division before she started to get hit with injuries and all that, I mean, you could see the clear path for the belt for her when she was going. Next up, we're gonna go with Ciryl Gane because I think it's Dos Santos. What am I talking about? It's Miocic, it's Ngannou, it's Jones, and this guy really isn't that far behind. I don't want to leave Curtis Blades out, but I do think that's kind of what, in terms of what the UFC wants, I think he's closer to a title shot than a lot of people would imagine. And then obviously number one would be Khamzat Chimaev. I mean, he can really. I think the Leon Edwards fight is gonna let us know what we really have in him. But there's a path where he could beat Edwards, call somebody out, and be ready for a title shot. All right, you're up.
For me, there's only 2 fighters that I'd move around. So for me, at the top, it's Chimaev. Then it'd be Ciryl Gane. Then I would probably go Jiri Prochazka just because he has that big fight coming up against Reyes. If you win that fight, do you get the winner of Adesanya Blachowicz? Like, what are we talking here? Because that's right up at the top of the division. You already have a win against Volkan Oezdemir. Then I would say, just based on the 2-year layoff, almost 2 years for Tatiana Suarez, she's still there, but we probably need another fight or 2 before she even fights for a belt. And who knows when that's going to happen. After her, I go with Merab dvalishvili. I mean, he's looked great. He's ranked now, but it'll be interesting to see when he takes on somebody like, you just beat John Dodson. John Dodson's out of the UFC now. Who do you fight? Like there's a lot of good names at 35, but it's just tricky. And you're probably 2, 3, 4 wins away from the upper echelon. And then at the very bottom, but again, this is why it's the hype index. Manon Fiorot comes in, knocks out another UFC debutant. But you get 2, 3 wins and you're right up there at the top of that division. So, I think she has a really high ceiling. I like what I saw in that fight and what I saw from her 2020. But these are all good, really good prospects.
Yeah, I think that, my worry for Merab is that he's going to fall into that place kind of where Zabit falls, which is no one really wants to fight you and we really can't market you. So it's like your path towards the belt. Listen, it is Dana White's nightmare that either Merab Dvalishvili or Zabit Nurmagomedov Sharipov would be. I know.
Whoa. Manon Fiorot. Zabit Magomed Sharipov.
Zabit Magomed Sharipov.
There you go, Shlu.
Merab Dvalishvili. That one I got. It would be a nightmare for either Zabit or Merab to be a champion for Dana. I just feel that way. It's nothing, no knock on the guys. They're great fighters. So you're in that spot where nobody wants to fight you, and the promotion doesn't really want you to be the champ. Speaking of people that not everybody wants to fight, let's move on to For the Gram. Craig, Juliana Pena and Laura Murphy both had impressive outings in their last fight. So it begs the question, which one of these fighters is more deserving of a title shot? Because they're both calling for them. Juliana Pena or Laura Murphy?
Well, really at 125, I think Jessica Andrade deserves a chance. Chikagian had a decent winner last fight. And then you have Lauren Murphy at 3. And then you look at bantamweight, and Juliana Pena is down at 6 with Aldana on top, Pennington, Ladd, Holm, Durandamy, Nunes. Juliana Pena does not deserve a title shot in the least. Like, she is one of the least deserving fighters of a title shot. You beat 40-year-old Sarah McMahon. What do you want? Do you want the Fight Night Picks Pick'em trophy? Like, way to go. Cool win. Awesome. Great. Your record's now what? Is it 9-4 or is she 10-4 now? And she's been incredibly inactive. I don't think, go out there and beat Jermaine Durandamy and show us that you deserve a shot. Oh, wait, the kickboxer submitted you. Listen, I sound like a mean guy from all of this. Lauren Murphy was our 2020 Female Fighter of the Year. How could I not say that it's Lauren Murphy?
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think that you got to talk about how much left there is for these fighters. I think Lauren Murphy's done a lot. I think she definitely is on a run that is worthy of it. These divisions are relatively thin. I like Juliana Pena. I do. I think that complaining, and listen, I'm going to be a huge hypocrite here because it fits my narrative right now. But listen, they set him up and she knocked him down, right? Hey, what are you going to go to the bowling alley and complain about the pins? They set him up, she knocked him down. That's how it goes. I think that I'm going to still cape for Lauren Murphy, but I think that, Juliana Pena, if not this fight, if I'm Juliana Pena, this fight, I tell the UFC, you tell me who you want me to beat for this title shot. Give it to me next, and then I'll take that's all I want. You tell me if you're not happy with the way the Durandamy fight went, then bring her back. Fine. I'll do it at 135. But I want to get a shot at Amanda Nunes. You tell me the girl I got to beat to convince you, because you're the one that are picking these fights. So you tell me the person I got to beat to convince you that I deserve this shot. All right, Craig, let's move on to one Twitter hitter. Craig, I know we're all obsessed with the lightweight division. It was half our damn rundown, for Christ's sakes, and our sparring session. But there are other divisions and some good fights coming up. I'm going to ask you about 3 fights in particular, only because I want to know if any of these fights are going to be the catalyst for this division or for their particular division to be the next quote-unquote hot division in UFC or MMA, whatever. Miocic Ngannou, Bobby Knuckles and Paulo Costa, and Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns, because I think that these fights are kind of, I don't want to say flying under the radar, but they're going to be honest before you know it. And I feel like we're not talking about them that much because we're worried about what Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier next. So which fight interests you, and by extension, which one might lead to a resurgence of that division?
Whitaker Costa. I think that's the one. Usman Burns, great fight. Does it really free up the top half of the division? I don't believe so. Miocic Ngannou, If Miocic wins, cool. He fights John Jones. If Ngannou wins, cool. He probably fights John Jones. And then you still have a logjam top half of the division. And then you have a bunch of guys from like 7 down or from 8 down that are really on a downturn. So for me, it's Whitaker Costa. I think middleweight has a lot of great talent. I know Edmund Shabazian didn't have a good showing against Brad Tavares, but still a good prospect. Tavares looked good against Antonio Carlos Jr. Ian Heinisch has a big fight coming up against Kelvin Gastelum. Like, there's a lot of interesting moving pieces at 185 pounds that I think, again, you talk flying under the radar, just that. I mean, what if Uriah Hall just continues this late career resurgence after beating Anderson Silva? I really like 185 right now, and I think a fight between Whitaker Costa really shores things up. Again, you want more names like Jack Hermanson, Marvin Vettori, Darren Till's got a big fight coming up against Vettori. Like, we can just keep going on down the line. A fight with Whitaker Costa really figures out, okay, Adesanya, he's kind of ducking out of another title fight at 85. He's moving up to fight Blachowicz. This is probably, has to be, I would think, for the next title challenger, even though Costa's coming off a loss to Adesanya. But I really like that fight. I think it means a lot.
I agree with 85. I think 85 has always been a weird division because for a lot of years, it was just dominated by Anderson Silva, and there wasn't anybody that was, fit to carry his fight kit. But at the same time, in between Anderson Silva and Adesanya, we had Bobby Knuckles. And when he was in there, he kind of felt like the guys that were fighting him had a chance. So it seemed like a more competitive division. You know what I mean? Like, you felt like, all right, maybe Yoel could beat him, and maybe, some of these other guys can beat him. He seemed like he was, and then obviously Adesanya got him. As soon as Adesanya won the belt and had a couple defenses, we were like, oh, here we go again with Anderson. Like, he looks like Anderson. He fights like Anderson. He's just going to dominate this division forever. So I guess it depends on what you want. Do you want a dominant champion that can skip a couple divisions? Do you want Anderson 2.0 or 3.0 or just Anderson 2021? If that's the case, then yeah, you're pulling for Adesanya to stick around. But if you don't, and you want Robert Whitaker and Paulo Costa trading wins, and you want Vettori getting in there, maybe beating, you want some of these other guys to sort of make their runs, then it gets a lot more interesting as a division with Whitaker up there. But I will remind you that when divisions don't have dominant champions, people kind of get a little bit cold on them. When Robbie Lawler was champ at 170, nobody really cared. I mean, Robbie Lawler was a guy that could have lost the belt anytime or defended it, and people really lost interest in 170. It was only when Kamaru Usman came in there and started really dominating that people gained interest again. People are always going to want to see who can take not to the extent they had when GSP was the champ, but I just think
Woodley did a pretty good job.
Yeah, but do you think that the division was more popular? 170 was most popular with Lawler, Woodley, or Usman as champion, in your opinion?
Woodley or Usman? I mean, I would slightly edge Usman, but I think Woodley did a pretty good job. I mean, there were some pretty hype fights at the time. Anyway, it's just unfortunate the way the Thompson fights went, or portions of the Thompson fights.
That's true, and I would almost argue that the Thompson fights sort of mirror the Yoel Romero fights that Robert Whitaker and Yoel Romero had. They were better fights, the Romero-Whitaker fights, but they were kind of left you feeling unresolved. And I think that's kind of, those fights bring divisions down. People like to know clearly who the man is, who the next man is, and those fights just didn't do it for him.
In and Out of Love by Tyron Woodley. Insert that in there.
All right, let's move on to Posting to the Book. Craig, GSP came out and said that the Poirier loss might be a chance for Conor McGregor to be reborn. Now, GSP continues to have 1 foot in and 1 foot out when it comes to MMA. He says that Conor should embrace the loss and, again, look at it as a chance to be reborn. Listen, we could dive deep here into what GSP fight prompted GSP to think that your career needs to be reborn after a loss, probably Matt Serra. But we go down that route. Now, listen, GSP wants the Khabib fight. Conor wants the Khabib fight. It seems like neither will get it. Craig, let's do it. Would it be a hell of a consolation prize for these guys to fight each other?
GSP would mop the floor with Conor McGregor. Like, 38-year-old GSP would beat the tar out of that poor guy. He'd send him back to Dublin or Crumlin, working a mini excavator. but not in Abu Dhabi. Like GSP would beat him bad. Like all he would have to do was wrestle. And it's not like, you know, we talk about Conor McGregor's skills on the ground, and a lot of people were really critical of him. The guy that called him, Dustin Poirier, the guy from TikTok, you know, he should have taken him down. He should have worked on his grappling. Conor McGregor is a good defensive enough or sound enough defensive grappler that he can usually get himself out of some pretty bad positions. He was down on his butt in that fight, right? What happened?
Yeah.
He ended up back up on his feet. Like Conor McGregor isn't a good offensive grappler. He's not a good offensive wrestler, but he doesn't need to be because he's such a good striker. Or at least he's such a good boxer. Maybe his footwork isn't there anymore. So for me, I think GSP would win that one. Would it be a good consolation prize? Would I not watch it? No, I'd be watching that. No more double negatives, but yeah, I'd be down for it.
Let's talk about the logistics then. Do you think that if you're GSP, you'd want to fight Conor at 55?
No,
with the
70.
hopes. Well, hold on. With the hopes that now this is the fight where I'm going to try and make 55 to still, if I win, lure Khabib out. The problem I think with this Khabib fight is once you, and I think, listen, Dana knows more about this stuff than I do. He talks to all the parties involved. I think that if you're Dana and you strip Khabib, here's why you don't strip Khabib, or why he hasn't yet. You lose the Conor fight because Khabib's not going to want to fight Conor or Dustin as a challenger, right? So you lose the Conor or the Dustin fight for that matter. And you might lose the GSP fight because even though these guys would want to fight each other, I think the big thing that you hold that brings GSP back is that 55-pound belt. If Khabib doesn't have it anymore, then, you know, it is what it is. All right, let's move on to the Flurry. 3 quick ones, 2 involving the same thing. Craig, Justin Gaethje says if Conor gets a title shot, he would consider leaving the UFC. Do you believe him?
No. And didn't he also kind of talked about the bungled attempt at him fighting Michael Chandler that didn't come through. I think if Conor got a title shot, Gaethje be fine. Where's he going to go? The PFL?
Well, he gets $1 million. Although he's probably making that just on bonuses. Craig, Sean O'Malley said, while holding his newborn child, mind you, that he wants to try heroin. Do you believe him? No. What are we going to do with this guy?
I mean, listen, John, this is one of those things like Fight Night Picks. We have a list of topics. We like to stick to them. We talk about the Flurry at the end. It's news stories that we might have missed. Other podcasts, you know, are called Shooting the Shit, and that's a real thing. But there's a lot of podcasts out there where people just, you know, kind of bullshit and talk about whatever. And in certain circumstances, they take fan questions. And we do that sometimes. But I'm not one of those shooting the shit type of podcast guys. I just saw like a quick clip of it. I'm assuming that was the context. I don't know. I don't read a whole lot into it.
I'm with you. And I think that Sean O'Malley needs to understand optics a little bit better. And he's a young guy. Listen, when you become a parent, you realize there's all kinds of shit you say to your kids when they're babies that don't mean anything, you know, like you'll just say stupid stuff because they're your kid and you're frustrated, that don't really amount to much in the grand scheme of things. So it's not like someday Sean O'Malley's kid's going to be 18 and go, hey, remember that time you said you were thinking about trying heroin when you were holding me? But guess what he will do? Or she, I don't know if it's a boy or a girl. Guess what that child will do? They'll say, hey, guess what I just saw on the internet? You saying that you might try heroin while you were holding me. This is why you got to think about that stuff, man. Your life doesn't end tomorrow. There's like when you say things, they stick around on the internet. So speaking of that, Tim Welch asked on the same podcast, and we'll give them a shout out. They're local here. They're probably recording not too far from where I live. The Timbo Sugar Show. Asked Casey Kenny if he would sleep with Megan Anderson. And Kenny just flamed her, said she was whatever she was, a 3, or, you know, he just dogged her out. Immediately, they got backlash. From the women of Twitter, they said, who is Casey Kenny to be picking? And from other people on Twitter, it was, why would you want to, you know, be reductive to Megan Anderson? For his part, I will defend Tim Welch only in this way. What he was saying, it's a horrible question. His entrance into the question, if this makes it any better, which it doesn't, but his entrance to the question was that Megan is so tall and Casey's so short. That was where he was coming at it from. Not, was she attractive enough for you to hook up with? But when these things get going, man, there's snowballs going down a hill. Yeah,
that's it. Like, again, think about the optics. I get it. You're on a podcast, you're hanging out, like we're shooting the shit, like another MMA podcast that's out there. And you know, you just kind of let it fly off the cuff and you don't think anything of it. And we talked about this even before we came on air, a little bit inside baseball. You know, you say things that you definitely shouldn't say, but yeah, it's almost like on certain podcasts like this, it's almost like it's in confidence. Your buddies, like, I can just say whatever I want and there's not going to be any backlash. You got to check yourself. You know, I might say ridiculous things on this podcast. I don't think I've ever said anything that's like too wild or controversial or anything that I couldn't back up. You wouldn't find me saying something like that. Maybe you can. Maybe you're going to go through and dig through every Fight Night Picks archive. And I've said some awful things. And listen, who hasn't said awful things? But in a circumstance like this, when you're apologizing for it, the old apology, you know, I didn't mean to hurt your feelings. That's a bad one. Like, you get yourself in more trouble when you say that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you just need to get it, you know, and one of the problems that was, and listen, I live in Phoenix, Arizona. These guys live in Phoenix, Arizona. So me taking umbrage with them, somebody might clip this, put it on Twitter, and I might have an issue with these guys down the street. But I would tell them the same thing in their face that I'm telling you right now, which is you got to know better than to do something like that. It's fun to have fun with your buddies, but there's things that you say before the show, and there's things that you say during the show, and they found that out. I don't need to prove that to them. They proved it to themselves. All right, Craig, let's get out of here. We'll start the conversation. Shouts to MMA Reddit. Let's start the conversation with Jake Paul says boxing is an art and MMA is a brawl. We opened the show with a quote, but I'll give it to you again. These MMA guys, just because they throw punches doesn't mean they can box. This is why I'm so confident in my ability to destroy these guys. They're throwing elbows, kicks, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, the list goes on. Boxing is an art, MMA is a brawl. Craig, is boxing an art, MMA a brawl?
I've seen boxing fights that are brawls. I've seen parking lot boxing that was a brawl. Like, they can be both. They can both be brawls. They can both be an art. Now I'm just struggling with my words. Meryl Streep probably doesn't like any of them. Mixed martial arts definitely aren't the arts. But, you know, you see a highly technical MMA fight. You see Zabit Magomedsharipov when he takes on Brandon Davis and he does a Sulev stretch. And then you see Aljamain Sterling do a Sulev stretch in the same night. And then you see Patchy Mix do it over in Bellator. And it's like, hey, you talk about hot in the streets. Is a Sulev stretch hot in the streets? No. Why? Because it's really hard to do. It's incredibly technical and you never see it, let alone on the same card, which was just absolutely insane. So for me, listen, both of them have opportunities to be, you know, an art form or to be, to put it in the words of Jake Paul. I never thought I'd say that before. But yeah, it can be art. But yeah, I've seen boxing fights that are brawls. You've seen them as well. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, don't try and one up MMA though.
I would say don't try and one up MMA when you are avoiding MMA because of its complexity. You know, you're choosing to engage in boxing. Here's what I would say to Jake Paul. If you think boxing is an art and MMA is a brawl, I will take that bit of that statement from you as this. One is very difficult and one is very simple. If that's the case, then why is a YouTuber able to go 2-0 in one and not 2-0 in the other? So I get where he's saying that, like, maybe because you use your hands and you're limited, maybe he's saying that maybe it was just a clunky quote and maybe he means boxing is a striking art and MMA is a striking brawl. I would disagree with that statement as well, but that might be what he's getting at. Because, you know, you're limited to your hands. You have to be more technical with your footwork and where you hit and how you hit. Listen, man, you knocked a basketball player dead. Let's not, you know, you're not all of a sudden Customato. You're not all of a sudden, you know,
Jake Paul, the next Tony Atlas.
Yeah, you're not all of a sudden Teddy Atlas, you know. So I think that's
no. I mean, like WWE's Tony Atlas.
Oh yeah. I just think that he needs to understand that this doesn't make him some sort of evolved thinker of combat because he knocked out Nate Robinson. You know, I think that's he should probably slow his roll a little bit on that. And if he thinks that boxing's just a brawl, then he should be happy to get in a brawl. I mean, if he thinks MMA is just a brawl, he should be happy to get in a brawl, hop in, try yourself out. You know, at least CM Punk had the balls to hop into an octagon. He looked stupid doing it, but at least he had the balls.
Tony Atlas, only 66 years old.
Wow. Who's older, Tony or Teddy? That's the question.
I'll look up Teddy as we exit.
No relation. All right, Craig. This episode of Fight Night Picks is in the books. Craig can be followed at Craig Allen FMP. I can be followed at SM Cornerman. The fight has been stopped. We'll see you next week. Craig, say something witty that includes Teddy Atlas's age.
Teddy Atlas is 64 years old, hailing from Staten Island, New York. Let's get into it.